Enregistrement commencé.
Okay,
You can start again, sorry.
No problem. So that presentation will be an extended version of the presentation I made in October this year at the ISWC conference. As I was saying, this was in the resource track, which is not the same as the research track. In the resource track, what you do is to promote a dataset or a software that is useful for a certain community. So, and the fact is that in the project, the ISSA project that lasted 2 years, our point was not to make some scientific breakthrough, but to propose a solution that was reusable by the other communities. So a bit of motivation on that. We all witnessed the fact that articles are being published ever faster, that maybe in journals, in conferences, or as preprints. Such that it's increasingly difficult to keep up, and in particular to find the articles that may be interesting for your own research, to search across multiple disciplines, that's usually even more complicated. And in that landscape, there is a certain kind of actor, which is the scientific archives, that has a central role to play. Those archives, these are, so in France, this is typically AL, but there are also lots of domain-specific archives where institutions store the papers published by their own researchers. So it can be cross-domain, it can be specific to a given domain. But in any case, so and open scientific archives are those archives that favor the publication of articles in open access. The problem of those archives is that they have some limitations in terms of research. Usually you can search publications by strings, mostly keywords, but these are just strings. And those string-based search just fail to grasp the relationships that actually exist between several publications. Also, the keywords, which are usually the author keywords, are very generic. You can add like 4 or 5 keywords to your paper, and that's super high level, and that's almost useless when you want to make a very specific search. And sometimes it happens that some institutions have scientific and technical information experts, documentalists, who will do the job of indexing the publications. That is, assign keywords to the publications, and those keywords come from a specific controlled vocabulary. But that's relatively rare because that's a manual activity and it's very time consuming. So maybe just a precision for us. We are computer scientists, and we are used to deal when you're doing your own state of the art. Usually the publications you're dealing with are at the maximum 20 years old. If you're doing machine learning, it may be 10 years old. Now, if you look at other disciplines, other topics, that can be very different. If you are in the humanities, like social sciences or history, or biology, taxonomic biology, things like that, these people deal with publications that are decades or even sometimes more than 100 years old. So they really need those tools, even though we in computer science don't necessarily use them because, well, most of the time we just Google something and we get where we want. But still, in other domains, that the need is much more crucial than in our case, I think. And so the need, the idea in this project is to say, okay, the conclusion is that we need smarter tools to help scientists make some specific search throughout the whole knowledge that is contained in those scientific archives. And that's the purpose of the ISSA project, which is to propose a generic, reusable, and extensible solution to optimize bibliographic search in Open Scientific Archive. Generic, that means it can be reused for any community. So the solution needs not be specific to a certain research domain. Reusable, that means we should be able to connect it to one open archive or another. We know how, but there are lots of other solutions. And extensible, which means that we provide the solution with a set of processing of the articles, but there could be additional processing that need to be added to the whole pipeline, and the solution must be extensible in this way. So to do that, what we did is well, the approach is relatively natural, I would say. The first thing is that we're going to read the publications from the archive we are dealing with, and we'll try to extract rich metadata from those publications, either just the standard metadata, but also through parsing and processing the text. We will turn this into a semantic index that we will publish, of course, as an RDF knowledge graph. Then we will make, as much as possible, we will link this index with vocabularies that are on the web of data. So that could be generic vocabularies like Wikidata or DBpedia, but that could also be domain-specific vocabularies. And I will show an example a bit later. We also want to provide, on top of that, we want to provide some tools that will allow search and visualization of the publications that are in the archive. And finally, one also point of the project was to demonstrate the effectiveness of that solution. And to do so, we used as a use case the Agritrop archive. So Agritrop is the open archive of the research center called CIRAD. CIRAD is the French Research Center for Agriculture and Development. Yeah, this is it. Okay. So at the heart of the solution, just a few guidelines that we decided to follow while developing the solution. First, the solution needs to be multilingual. We don't want to process only English articles, but that could be article in different languages. Second, we want to have something that's going to be robust. So we wanted to rely on tools that are production ready, that can scale to large databases and so on. That also means that we did not select the tools that might be the more efficient in terms of recent state of the art, but we want tools that will work and will keep on working for years, even if you feed them with thousands and thousands of articles. So in other words, there might be some solution, some pretty fancy algorithm developed in a PhD, but that's just a prototype, and whenever you want to try it on a big archive, it's going to crash immediately. So we don't want that. So we prefer to have something that works not as good as that, but that will be able to sustain a big load. The deployment should be made rather easy, and maintenance efforts should be light. We also want to, well, that's sort of not an objective, a philosophy. If you want to propose a software solution that will last in the time, you'd better rely on simple and well-adapted technologies rather than use the very last fancy JavaScript framework, because in 2 years from now, it's not going to be supported anymore. And you say, so sometimes better use a basic bash than writing a library, writing something in Python on a library that will not be sustained. So that's the whole idea. Okay, so I'll get into the details of the pipeline. So here is how it works. The first thing, we start from, yeah, you can't see my mouse. Yeah, it's here. You start from the Open Archive here, and like I said, in the use case of the project, it was Agritrop. Oh, by the way, I didn't say it. Agritrop contains over 100,000 entries, among which 12,000 full-text open access articles. So we processed the metadata of 100,000 articles, but only the full text of 12,000. So the first thing is that we get the metadata from that archive, and for that, there is a protocol that's called OAI PMH that's very common among librarians and archives. That's the API you can find on AL and many other systems. So the idea is that if we implement this one for Agritrop, it should be easy to use it for AL and any other one. So here we just retrieve whatever is in the system, the basic metadata, title, authors, dates, and so on and so on. Second, we translate this basic metadata into an RDF representation. And here, well, we've not looked too far. So we've reused basically what we had done in COVID on the web, just improved it a little bit. Second thing, we get the text of the article. So we download PDFs. And once we get them, we extract the text of the PDFs with a tool called Grobid. Grobid is the one that's already used in HAL. So that gives you an idea that, okay, it's stable enough to take the load of all the articles that are imported in HAL every day, even though it's not the best thing to extract text from PDF. But again, we wanted something stable. And once we have done that, we can start doing fancy stuff. So there will be two default types of processing here. The one is very natural, is the extraction and linking of named entities, and the second one will be the indexing of the thematic indexing of the publications. So I will say a bit more on that. So here's any kind of article, and in this kind of article you have the keywords here, which are the author keywords. Like I was saying, these are usually just let's say less than 10, probably more commonly in the order of 5, and it's not so much informative, or it's little informative. What we want is to be able to come up with a list of terms that will be much more, possibly many more, and also much more accurate. And to do that, it's basically some classification. Also, yeah, I didn't say it, but we want to have those terms linked with a controlled vocabulary. So in the case of Agritrop, that archive, we wanted to link it with Agrovoc. So yeah, don't be confused with those two names. Agritrop is the archive, Agrovoc is the vocabulary. It's a vocabulary that's been developed for decades about agriculture, agronomy, development. So it's the vocabulary of choice for this specific archive. And what we want to have in the end is be able to infer a list of terms that will qualify the article as a whole. That means those terms may not exist directly in the articles. That may not be mentioned in the text itself, but that describes, that characterizes the content of the article. That's what we want to do. And to do that, we used a solution which is called ANIF. It's I think it is developed by the University of Finland, and it's meant to do some classification of scientific literature. So it's very much adapted. Just give me a sec. So the first step here is okay. Yeah, here we start. First, you choose the target vocabulary that you want to use to annotate your article. So here, that's going to be Agrovoc, but the idea is that it could be changed. So it can be for any other community. They could choose the vocabulary that will be the more relevant for their own concerns. Then you get the structured text, you get the annotations that have been produced already by human actors, and then you use that as a training corpus. And then you will select a model. So you have a set of models that you can select and group within the framework. You could even plug in your own models. So you train your model, and in the end, what you want to get is a trained model that will be able to predict the keywords that most relevantly characterize your articles. So in that specific case, that means we are in a situation where we have an archive that has been pre-annotated. That's the case of this archive, Agrovoc. The CIRAD has documentalists who work on importing the papers, and anytime they import the papers, they will select from that vocabulary, from Agrovoc, from like 30,000 terms in the thesaurus, they will select those which are the most relevant to characterize the articles. So we have this training corpus, which is, I mean, a very strong base. So we can do some supervised classification. In the end, that's what it means. And we have come up in the end with a model that is some ensemble of lexical matching and a tree-based machine learning algorithm. I'm just reading this, I don't know what that means. But in the end, here are the kind of results that we get. So at the first sight, you could say, well, that's pretty bad. If you look at the F1 score, 39% in French, 35% in English, that's pretty bad. Now, if you look at the precision for the first keyword, it's not so bad. It's almost 77% for English, for French, and 68% for English. Now you have to understand something about those measures. Whenever this task of annotating an article is very subjective. So if you take one article and you ask 3 documentalists to annotate it, they will come up with 3 different annotations. So among them, there's going to be some common keywords, but some other will appear only in one of the annotations. And that makes the measure of the quality of your result really hard, because you don't really know what's the ground truth. There is no such thing as a ground truth. So what we did so far is to come to the documentalist at CIRAD and say, okay, here is the article that we have imported, and here's the terms that the system has inferred. And their reaction was pretty positive. They were saying, oh, that's interesting. I wouldn't have chosen this one, but that actually works. So most of the time, that was the kind of result that we had. So we feel like this is, okay, we are on the right track, okay? Again, figuring out a right measure of that quality is something that's definitely not easy, and we have a need for more work on that. So second type of processing I was mentioning is about extraction and linking of named entities. So here we have reused very common tools. That's entity fishing that extracts and links named entities with Wikidata. Spotlight that links with entities from DBpedia. And for the last one, so those first ones are generic purpose vocabularies, DBpedia and Wikidata. And we also wanted to do this name entity extraction and linking with a domain-specific vocabulary. And here again, the vocabulary of choice was Agritrop, because that's the one that is the most appropriate for the domain of that archive. And here we used a library called PyCleanRec. It's basically a dictionary-based training. So I don't know much about it, but the results were reasonable, let's say. Still, there would be some work to do here, because it generates lots and lots of annotations. So unlike entity fishing, for instance, that uses Wikipedia articles as a context to figure out the correctness, the accuracy of the entities that you extract, this dictionary-based approach doesn't take into account any context, so you have a lot of noise, basically. That's what it means. Lots of noise, but at the same time, you have a very focused vocabulary. So you have some noise, but it's focused on a very specific domain, so maybe not so much. But still, there would be some work to do to evaluate the quality of those annotations. Okay, so coming back to this pipeline, we have retrieved the metadata, the PDFs, extracted the text, applied text classification and named entity extraction and linking. And now that we have all of that, we can translate all of this into a representation in RDF, which is, again, the same kind of thing that we've done in COVID on the web, that is using the web annotation ontology. And we pulled all of this in a triple store. And in the end, we have a nice data set that we can publish on the web, of course, as usual, which is linked to Wikidata, DBpedia, and Agritrop. You have a few figures here about the data set, but well, we can discuss that later if you like. And now that we have that, we can do a bit more fancy things like exploiting this index. The point is not just of creating the index, but show that it's interesting to do it, that is, show use cases. Yeah, that's other data about the data set itself. Just a word about how much time it takes to execute the pipeline. So if you take the 12,000 articles, that is the open access articles, those for which we have processed the full text, we need, in the end, something like 36 hours, But if you look carefully, among these, you have 20, sorry, where is my mouse? Can you see my mouse? Yeah. You have 17 hours just to download the PDFs. So that's huge. The training of the models itself are not so big. So training of the ANIF model, that classification is just half an hour. The extraction of the named entities, depending on the tool, is between half an hour and 7 hours, no, and 3 hours. We used also the Wikidata entities to extract geonames entities so that we could come up with an annotation with geographic locations. And in the end, you have these 5 hours at the bottom. Again, I can't find my mouse. These 5 hours at the bottom, which is just about sort of dumping the data about the entities we have from DBpedia and from Wikidata. So it's just copying existing data. So that takes quite some time, but this is something you have to do only once. That is the very first time you process the archive. Then, if you just do it on a delta basis, and we have scheduled it to do it weekly, so every week we have like 100 new articles, and the whole thing would take 1.5 hours, more or less. So it's very acceptable, and it works, and it's stable. I mean, that was one of the main goals. Okay. So well, now we can start doing a bit more fancy stuff, and that's going to be with things that you know pretty well. You have seen already existing things about how to visualize things. We have some experts of that in the team. The very first thing that we have done is this interface. It's just what we call the notice of an article, which just displays the metadata of the article. But on top of that, we have a display of, sorry, why? Yeah, really can't find it. You can see the abstract of the article with the highlighted named entities. Those entities are linked to the databases, Wikidata, DBpedia, and Agritrop. And you also have this visualization. So it's a very basic import of the what's the name? OpenStreetMap's card, but just at one site, you can see the places that are mentioned in the text. And as you can see, that can be really useful because immediately you have an insight into what is the region that's concerned with this article. So that's very basic, but that can still be very useful. Okay, next thing, you know RVs, which is a visualization of association rules. So Lucy has worked on an algorithm to extract association rules. We have reused this one, and Aline has developed, and maybe Aline, I don't know if you, Lucy, I don't know if you were developing this interface too. No, you were doing the algorithm behind, and Aline developed this interface that's a visualization of the association rules. So what it says basically is that I'm looking for a certain type of concept, which is on the top left on the window, which is in this case climate change mitigation. And when I fly over that purple diamond shape, I can see that whenever an article mentions climate change mitigation and tropical forests, then it very likely also mentions carbon sequestration. I can have an idea of how likely this is, how interesting this is. So you have those two measures of confidence and interestingness, and then you can get the list of articles that do match that association rule. So this one, when we showed that to the documentalists, they were very interested because the first thing they say is that, okay, maybe we could really discover things that we don't expect, because lots of rules are, say, very likely, or okay, there are things that you can like COVID-19. Whenever it talks about COVID-19, it also talks about coronavirus. Oh, yeah, okay, no fancy stuff. But in some cases, it proposes something that can be much more surprising. So there is here a potential usage for discovering something like new hypotheses, maybe connections that you have never noticed, but still that are commonly occurring in the literature, and that potentially means something that you should want to explore. And the next thing is going to be LDVs. Again, that's something I think you have seen in several presentations. So the idea of LDVs is to navigate through networks of entities, and entities can be any kind of thing that you have in your graph. So that can be the authors, the articles, the descriptors of the articles, the topics that they pertain to, the institutions, and so on and so on. Oops, sorry. So here is an example. Again, you remember we have classified our documents with and annotated them with terms from the Agritrop thesaurus. So here I will select one term from that thesaurus, which is health. And you can see that in this, there is a hierarchy of terms, and health has subconcepts, which are animal health, forest health, material health, and so on and so on. So what we can do is not only visualize what exists in the graph, but do querying and reasoning at the same time on top of the knowledge base that we are connecting with. So in this visualization, the green nodes are health or any of its subconcepts. And the other orange nodes are any other concept. So concept meaning, again, these are the result of the classification. So that's the thematic descriptors that we have assigned to the articles. And obviously I can't read from here. Wait a sec. Can you read what this is? Environmental impact. Okay, merci. So in this case, I fly over that red node, that orange node, which is environmental impact, and then I can see that environmental impact is connected to the green nodes, which are public health, mental health, forest health, and so on. So again, this is a way of discovering current connections that you may not find necessarily obvious, and navigate through that. And then once you've done that, you yeah, still here. Okay, sorry. And when you've done that, you can see the list of articles that are concerned by those concepts and get their distribution through a time and so on and so on. And you can come back and do other visualizations, and Marco and Aline will be the most, the best people to talk to you about this. So in this example, I was showing how to navigate through the descriptors that we have assigned to the articles using classification. But again, we can use the same visualization to navigate through a network of a graph of authors that have co-publications, or a graph of the opposite. You can have a graph of articles with co-authors, and you can see, I don't know, institutions with the same topics. And we were discussing with people in the biodiversity area, so they would be interested in seeing navigating through the taxonomic concepts that are mentioned in the articles and things like that. So it's super flexible, and there are lots and lots of applications probably to find here and to customize. But again, the customization of that is basically just a Sparkle query. So you write the appropriate Sparkle query, and immediately you have this new visualization. So that's really the power of this tool. Okay, so I try to summarize where we are. What time is it? Okay. We have come up with a pipeline and a set of visualization tools. We have deployed that on an existing institutional archive, Agritrop. We have processed the metadata of 100,000 articles and the full text of 12,000 articles. And that pipeline is now ready to transfer. So we have put everything under open licenses. We have tried to focus on the ability to deploy that very easily. It's based mostly on Docker containers and so on and so on. So now what are the perspectives? So the first thing, which is the good thing, that CIRAD, the partner who owns this Agritrop archive, is willing to deploy the ISSA pipeline and the visualization tools in production for their own researchers and documentalists. So, well, that's a good sign that we are in the right direction and we are doing something that can really interest people. What next? We have an ISSA 2 project that is starting this month, and in which we want to do a few things. First, extract new knowledge. So there are the relationships between the named entities. For now, we have computed the association rules between the thematic descriptors. We could do the same thing with the named entities, except that there are many, many more named entities. There is much more noise, so we need to figure out how to denoise that and still keep associations that are actually relevant and meaningful for the researchers. There is probably a lot of things to be done here. The service offering needs to be broadened. In particular, for now, we have not addressed the idea of how to search for documentation. That's the basic motivation in the beginning, how to search and find articles that are relevant for your own research. So we need to come up with some search interface that allows you to exploit the semantic connections between the articles, that allow you to make some maybe geographical search. So you could focus on some region of the world and say, I want all the articles that mention parts of this part of the world and are connected to this kind of crop, for instance. We have also a focus on bibliometry measures, which I'm not still very clear about what this is in the end. Also, I mentioned the case that with ANIF, we are doing supervised classification. This is cool because we had an Agritrop archive, which was already annotated by humans, by documentalists. But very frequently, that's not the case. So HAL doesn't have people who are working on annotated each and every documentation that comes in. So we need to figure out a way to do the same kind of classification, but in an unsupervised manner. And there are some leads to do that. The data quality metrics, I mentioned it. This is pretty difficult to figure out a good metric, and there is some work to be done here. And in that second phase, also, we will connect to an instance of HAL, which is the HAL instance of one of our partners, which will be a good demonstration that if we can do it with this one, we can do it with any HAL in France, which is, I think, quite interesting. And yeah, this is it. Thank you.